Oh, I think I can kind of hear you
Can you
now.
hear me?
You're very quiet, but I can kind of hear you. I think the audio was going through Mark's computer.
How about now?
That will do.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, so I'll be quick. Yeah. So I guess maybe I can just quickly start from the beginning. So yeah, so next we have Jenn Wortman Vaughan on a virtual talk on the topic of challenges in human agent communication. Jenn is a senior principal research manager at Microsoft Research, New York City, where she studies responsible AI with a focus of transparency, fairness, evaluation, and human AI interaction. Originally trained in machine learning and algorithm economics, she now draws on methods from human-computer interaction to investigate how people engage with AI systems. And with that, let's welcome Jenn for the presentation. And also, screen share.
Amazing. Can you hear me and can you see my screen?
Just a second for the screen part.
Okay.
There we go. Yes, we're good.
Amazing. And you can hear me fine?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. All right. Hi. So it's so nice to be here with all of you. Though I'm very sad that I can't actually be there with you in Montreal in person. Um, I know that we are right now in the middle of a busy day of talks, and virtual presentations are always kind of rough. Right now I can't actually see any of you, so I'm just hoping that folks are out there and listening to me. But I'm going to try my best to keep this light and engaging for you. So I am going to talk to you today about some of the challenges that come up in human agent communication from the human perspective. And Mark actually set me up very nicely for that. So thank you, Mark. But I'm going to take a little bit of a risk in this talk, and I am not going to actually try to offer you solutions to these challenges. What I will offer you is my own reflection on how the machine learning interpretability community, many of the people who are here in this room, can contribute to solving these challenges. And I also want to offer you a plea to do this with the needs of the human user in mind. So I think I'm actually going to be arguing for many of the same things that Mark was arguing for in his talk, but I'm going to be doing this at just a little bit of a different altitude than he was. Okay. So I think that a lot of people who are here don't necessarily know me. So similar to how Mark started off his talk, I want to start by just giving a little bit of backstory on my research trajectory and how I ended up working in the space that I'm going to be talking to you about today. So, as they said in my introduction, my research training was in two areas, machine learning theory and algorithmic economics. And what this actually means is that in my past research life, I spent a lot of my time designing algorithms and proving formal mathematical guarantees about these algorithms. So from early in my PhD, I was interested in the intersection between people and AI systems. But since my training was in theory, my people were these mathematically ideal people with well-defined preferences, well-defined beliefs, who behaved in well-defined ways. This was very appealing to me because everything was clean and precise and seemingly objective, right? There are none of the messes of the real world. But this all started to change for me back around 2016. At that time, machine learning was starting to be used more widely in more domains. And I became quite worried about whether the people who are relying on machine learning models actually understood the assumptions that were baked into these models. These worries ended up leading me to discover the literature that was coming out of the machine learning community on interpretability and explanations. So this was 2016. This was right around the time that Lime came out, followed shortly after by SHAP. It was also around the time that there were many arguments that were being made for the use of simple models like linear models or even simple point systems rather than more complex models. And this was always on the assumption that these models would be more interpretable and therefore more useful to people. But what I found was missing from a lot of the work in this space was a definition of exactly what was meant by interpretability. It was very common to see work that was basically proposing solutions without first stopping to define the problem that the work was trying to solve. And, there were also at the time very few attempts to put these interpretable models or explanations actually in front of people who would be using them. So I started talking about this problem with colleagues of mine with backgrounds in psychology and human computer interaction and other fields that tend to center the people. And with these colleagues, I started running both
Sorry, Jen,
yes.
a quick question. Have you progressed through the slide or are you
No,
still
no,
on the
I have not.
backstory?
Thank you for asking. And with these colleagues, I started running both tightly controlled behavioral experiments and even some qualitative interview studies to see how interpretability plays out in practice. So you should see my slides advancing now. So I took the position in this line of work that whether or not a model or explanation is interpretable is not something that we can just claim with no further proof, right? It's something that we need to prove empirically by validating that it actually helps real people, be these system builders or end users or whoever our target stakeholders are, to achieve their goals. So in a talk that I gave back at the NeurIPS Interpretability Symposium in 2017, I argued that it can be helpful to think about interpretability as a latent property that can be influenced by these different properties of system design. So things like the number of features in a model, the model structure, the user interface, and so on. And that then impacts these different measurable outcomes about human behavior. So things like a user's trust or their ability to debug a model or their ability to simulate what the model's predictions would be. Rather than talking about interpretability itself, it can be more fruitful, I found, to just directly look at how these kind of system design choices influence the human behavior. So just to give one very early example of this approach, in work that was led by Farouk Poursabzi, we looked at the impact of varying the number of features that a model has and whether the model internals are clear or black box on people's ability to make predictions with the help of the model. And we found that participants could better simulate predictions of clear models, but they didn't necessarily follow their predictions any more than those of black box models. And surprisingly to us, we found that participants were less likely to detect and correct mistakes that were made by clear, transparent models, which we hypothesized was due to information overload. This may not sound surprising now, but at the time it went against a lot of the widespread intuition that clear models would, of course, be better for people to use than black box models because they were more interpretable. We ran studies not just on end users, but on other stakeholders too, including data scientists who use interpretability tools in their day-to-day work. And we found evidence that data scientists tended to overtrust and misuse these tools in their work. In some cases, this led them to trust the underlying model, even when the explanation suggested that the model outputs were suspicious. So of course, nothing in the tech world is static. You may be listening to this backstory that I'm telling you, thinking that all of this is irrelevant in the modern age of LLMs, or in our case at Microsoft, the age of the AI copilot. But we're still seeing a lot of these same things crop up today. In fact, my colleague Vera Liao and I became so frustrated with these claims that people were making that we need to just throw all of our old principles and processes out the window, that we wrote an entire position paper and research roadmap looking at how we can take all of the expertise that we have as a community on human-centered AI transparency and apply it in these new settings. There's so much that we can build on here. But there are new challenges as well that we're seeing here, and also old challenges that are exacerbated by how widespread the use of AI tools has become. So today I want to talk specifically about some of the challenges that come up with the use of agents. And I want to talk about these challenges not because I have solutions, but because they're challenges that I would love to see the interpretability and explainability community digging into more. And I think this is an area where really, if we want to be successful, we need both the technical approaches and the human-centered. Okay, good. So before I get into the challenges of human-agent communication, what even is an agent? People throw around the term agent a lot these days, so I want to start by defining what I mean when I talk about an agent. So for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to draw on the classic textbook definition of agent from Russell and Norvig. By this definition, an artificially intelligent agent is a system that can autonomously perceive and take actions in the environment. Both of these components are important, the perception and the ability to take actions that impact the environment. We know the study of artificially intelligent agents traces back many decades, but there's been this recent resurgence of interest as modern generative AI has paved the way for this new class of agents that are increasingly sophisticated and powerful and general purpose. So in addition to using generative AI models to reason and plan, these new modern agents often have access to the internet. They can use tools, and in some cases, they can even generate and execute computer code. This lets us easily build agents that can schedule meetings, book flights, order food, or purchase groceries, all taking actions that have impact on both the digital and physical worlds. But while these changes have made it easier to create these powerful, goal-driven agents, they've also opened up the possibility of new kinds of failures. If you have an agent that can shop on a user's behalf, it could spend money in unintended ways, or it might leak the user's address, credit card number, or other sensitive information. An agent that can execute computer code can corrupt files, alter important settings, overwrite family photos, or take actions that jeopardize security. If a user doesn't properly understand an agent's capabilities and limitations, they may end up over-relying on the agent. So how do we mitigate these failures? Well, in situations where failures are costly or they're likely to occur, I'd argue it's critical to build our agents that clearly allow users to express their goals, preferences, and constraints, and form an accurate mental model of how the agent will respond and behave in response to this. Users should also be able to monitor the agent's behavior and effectively guide the agent with feedback and corrections as needed. Put another way, to enable this effective communication or collaboration rather between users, we need that agents and systems of multiple agents are designed to support transparency and control. Unfortunately, even putting aside the complexities of agents that plan and reason and use tools, generative AI models have characteristics that make the transparent disclosure of their operation particularly challenging. These include the wide and constantly evolving range of tasks that they can perform at different levels of competency, their massive and opaque architectures, which are often based on proprietary technology, their sensitivity to prompt and context, the stochasticity of their output, the diversity of their user bases and people who may require different levels of detail, and the expanding and often flawed perceptions of the public. Control is also notoriously difficult, with most attempts to control or steer generative AI systems by end users currently taking the form of prompts or system prompts. But we know that steering systems through prompting is really hard to do effectively, and there have been several recent studies that have shown this. This is due to the high metacognitive demands for effective prompting and to the difficulty that users have forming accurate mental models of how natural language queries map to system behaviors. So all of this leads to the question of how can we build agents to support transparency and control? And again, I'm going to put out this warning, disclaimer that I don't have a whole lot of answers to this question, but I'll talk about a framework for thinking through what's needed and how I think that this community here can contribute more. And here in this work, we draw on the literature on human communication and the idea specifically of grounding. So I'm using the term grounding here, but differently from how Mark was using it in his talk. I'm talking about it here in the communication sense. And this is based on work, this influential work of Clark and Brennan on grounding and communication that says that successful collaboration requires coordinating around context and process. This grounding happens through acts like clarifications, follow-ups, and repairs of communication breakdowns. So the key to enabling transparency and control with agents is really this effective two-way communication between the human and the agent, which is aimed at establishing common ground about the user's goals, the content, and about the process that the agent intends to take to achieve these goals. We're already starting to see these kinds of grounding acts happen in some existing AI systems. For example, here I asked ChatGPT for restaurant suggestions near the conference venue. Of course, I'm stuck here in New York, but I wanted to see what I was missing out on. And in addition to providing me with a couple of suggestions, ChatGPT offered naturally several ways that I could tailor its behavior to better meet my goals. For instance, by specifying cuisine type or budget or group size. And this itself can be viewed as a simple grounding act. Examples like this are not hard to find with current systems, but if you're interested in how prevalent this type of behavior is, my colleagues at Microsoft Research ran a cool study in which they did a comparison of grounding acts that appear in logs of human-human dialogues versus grounding acts that appear in human LLM interactions. And while they did see LLMs initiating grounding acts, they found that, among other things, the LLMs were 3 times less likely to initiate clarifications and 16 times less likely to provide follow-up requests compared with humans in human-to-human conversations. Though, of course, this behavior of models is constantly evolving. So in a recent paper with collaborators at Microsoft Research and the Allen Institute for AI, We attempted to map out the space of challenges for maintaining common ground in human AI communication. There are challenges around how to convey different pieces of information from the agent to the user. So before executing a plan, the agent needs to convey what it is the agent can do, what it's capable of, and what the agent is about to do. During execution, it needs to convey what it is currently doing and whether or not there are side effects and changes to the environment. And finally, after executing, it needs to convey whether the goal was actually achieved. There are also challenges around how to convey different pieces of information from the user to the agent. These include what the agent should achieve, so the user's goal, which preferences the agent should respect, and what the agent should do differently next time, so feedback for the agent. These are kind of interesting in that they get at, in some sense, what it means for the human to be interpretable to the agent. And there are also these overarching communication challenges. So these include how the agent should be designed in order to help the human verify its behavior, how the agent can convey consistent behavior, how the agent should choose an appropriate level of detail, and which past interactions the agent should consider when communicating. So I want to dive a bit more deeply into just a couple of these challenges that I think might resonate most with the interpretability community. And I warn you, all of this is going to be a little bit speculative on my part. But again, my goal here is to give you some potential problems to think about in your own research that I think would really address real human needs in this kind of human agent communication space. Okay, so let's start by thinking a little bit about challenge U2. Which preferences should the agent respect? Or put another way, how do we design agents that can establish common ground with humans about the user's preferences? For any high-level complex goal that the user might have, there are likely many possible ways for an agent to achieve the goal, but some align better with the user's intent than others. For example, many users may prefer to minimize time and expense and harmful side effects. But what counts as harmful, or which trade-offs are unacceptable or acceptable, can vary widely from person to person, or even from one context to another for the same person. Understanding these nuances is the key to building common ground. So the question becomes, how can the agent help the user surface, clarify, and communicate their preferences, especially when the user themselves might not know exactly what it is they want? Steering agents to respect user preferences is related to efforts to align or fine-tune large language models towards specific behaviors, tasks, or domains. But most current alignment techniques target aggregate preferences, what's broadly acceptable across many users, rather than these individual preferences of a particular person in a particular situation at a particular moment in time. So one possible solution to this challenge is to make any inferred preferences and constraints visible or accessible to users, a kind of interpretable user model as Viegas and Wattenberg have proposed. And we can then give users the option to modify these constraints. For example, ChatGPT lets users view, edit, or delete facts that it's memorized about them. And, that's a start, but it's static and it's something that's fairly coarse-grained. So imagine instead we had a system that could explain why it inferred a preference, show how that preference affects its behavior in the moment, and actually ask the user for confirmation or correction in context. How do we surface this kind of dynamic, in the moment, editable user model? I think that this is something that I would love to see more people thinking about. Okay, moving on to another one of these challenges. Let's think about one of the ones that has to do with conveying information from the agent to the user. What is the agent about to do? And this ties in with much of what Mark was talking about in his talk as well. So to achieve any complex goal, an agent needs to execute a large number of actions step by step, or even in parallel. If these actions are cheap to execute and easily reversible, there may be no need to explain them before they're executed, right? It may just be fine to go ahead. But when these actions are expensive, irreversible, or likely to result in undesirable side effects, it's important to establish common ground with the user before the plan is executed. This challenge has become prominent with modern agents because of advances in their generative and tool using capabilities. They can now send emails, make purchases, run code, and so on. And once we have these actions that have these real world effects, this sort of anticipatory transparency becomes really essential. The human needs to be able to predict what the agent is going to do next and why. So the question here is, when and how should the agent communicate its plans, and at what level of detail? As I alluded to earlier in the talk, too much detail we know can actually lead to information overload for users and make matters worse. So we want to avoid that. But if we give too little detail, the user loses the ability to intervene before something goes wrong. The right level of abstraction is something that depends on the stakes of the action. How much harm can this possibly cause? It depends on the user's expertise, and it depends on the user's mental model of the system. So this problem connects to all of this classical work on explainable planning, which focuses on explaining why an agent chose a particular plan or why an alternative was rejected. But generative agents extend this challenge. They must decide dynamically what to surface and when, often under uncertainty about the user's goals or understanding. So we've got some tools like GitHub Copilot Workstream that sort of illustrate early attempts to address this. They present a plan preview that users can inspect, edit, and approve before execution. So something that you can think of as kind of a perspective explanation. For the interpretability community, we can kind of think of this as a shift from these post hoc explanations, why did the model do this, to this kind of perspective interpretability. What is the model about to do and why? And I think that there are a lot of really interesting challenges here about what works best for the people who are actually interacting with these agents. Okay. The final challenge that I want to dig into is one of these cross-cutting challenges. How should the agent help the user verify its behavior? So modern agents are powerful, but they're obviously imperfect. We're never going to get to a point where they don't make mistakes. So a critical component of establishing common ground is giving the human the opportunity to verify that a shared understanding has been reached. Has the agent truly understood the user's goal? Is it really taking into account all of the user's preferences? When the agent says it's about to execute a certain plan, is this really what the agent is going to do? Establishing mechanisms for the user to easily verify the agent's state and behavior and steer them if they're not correct is really essential for effective communication. So verification goes kind of a step beyond interpretability. It requires evidence and mechanisms that allow users to test whether an agent's description of its intentions or actions are actually faithful for what it did or what it's about to do. How can we test an agent to make its internal state auditable? So not just explainable, but inspectable and testable. And, there are clearly a lot of connections between what I'm talking about here with verifiability and work that's going on in this kind of mechanistic interpretability space. But I think there's still a huge gap here between how we actually take some of that work and make it usable for the people, the real people who are interacting with agents. Okay. So each of these challenges that I've outlined here, this preference understanding, the perspective interpretability about what the agent is about to do, this verification, there are things that reveal gaps where interpretability research would be valuable. That's not to say that there's no research in this space. There certainly is research in this space, but we're not at the point yet where we have a good enough understanding of what's possible and what's actually helpful to end users. We need tools to make models legible and editable. We need plans that are interpretable before, during, and after execution. And we need internal states that are verifiable and auditable in real time in a way that's actually useful to people. So, there are deep technical questions here. How do we represent uncertainty over users' intentions? How do we summarize the latent reasoning of planning models at the right level of abstraction? How do we validate that explanations faithfully predict behavior? But going back to the start of my talk and a lot of the themes that came up in Mark's talk as well, there are also some really deeply human questions here about how people reason and communicate and collaborate and what kind of information is useful to them. In the end, whether a particular technical solution works for human agent communication is an empirical question that we really can only answer through studies with real people. And I would love to see more interaction between the more technical mechanistic interpretability community and the human AI interaction community on exactly these types of problems. So I'll close by just mentioning that the problems that I've raised today are not just about usability. They're really questions about how we preserve human agency as AI becomes more capable. So I think we have a big opportunity here. If we get this right, we can create a future in which AI truly helps people flourish, gives them the agency that they need to do so, which is the future that I would personally like to be in. So I would just love to see more work in this space. Ooh. So I will leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. And I think we have maybe 5 minutes for questions. Anyone in the audience? I guess I can start with one question. So I think I want you to maybe extrapolate the scenario a bit into thinking potentially AI is in the near or far future can do a lot more than humans, and maybe it can be really hard for humans to understand how and why an AI does that, simply because they are much more capable. They can predict or plan far much into the future. In that case, what do you think about these kind of explanations, and how do you think we can still best support humans with any sorts of explanations?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, first of all, I just want to note that when it comes to these challenges for maintaining common ground that I brought up earlier, I don't think that any of these challenges or any of this kind of need for communication and need for maintaining common ground is going to go away as AI systems become more capable. It's still going to be just as important, maybe even more important, because we're offloading more tasks to the system. for the system to understand what the user's goal is and what the user's preferences are. And it's going to be just as important for the user to be able to understand whether the goal was actually achieved in the way that they thought it was, or if there are any side effects that they should know about. All of these challenges are really kind of core challenges that exist regardless of how good the AI system is. I do think that uh, it's possible that the way that we actually address these, the particular types of ways that techniques from interpretability can help us address these challenges might change as systems become more capable. Um, but I don't I think it really depends. I mean, maybe we'll get to a point where it's less important for people to understand in quite as much detail every step of what an agent is doing because they just trust the system so much more because the agents are just so much more capable and we don't have to be kind of monitoring them as closely. And then some specifics might change. Maybe we can give them kind of higher level, more occasional insight into the behavior of the agent instead of this kind of more constant monitoring that may be necessary now. But I don't know. I just don't think that the fundamentals are really going to change.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Hello, Jennifer. Thank you for the talk. This is Harry from University of Toronto. I do appreciate and I really value the point that you brought up on the mechanistic interpretability in the larger machine learning community should work together or have like basically have more sort of common goals towards the human AI community, the HCI community. And I'm wondering how exactly would you imagine or what are the steps that needs to be taken for that to happen?
Yeah, that is a great question. Um, So I think, anytime that you want to do work that's interdisciplinary, it's hard. I am someone who I work in an interdisciplinary research lab. We have psychologists and economists and machine learning researchers, science and technology studies researchers, and so on. And so I am someone who believes very strongly in the value of people working across disciplines, kind of talking to each other, having these projects that, really combine expertise. I think we can do so much more that way. But anytime there's going to be this sort of interdisciplinary work, it's going to be time consuming. And a lot of it is going to be just getting people from these communities together, sitting in the same room, having conversations, repeatedly over time, asking each other questions, even these kind of basic questions like, uh, what is considered a successful research paper in your field? What are the goals that you're actually trying to do? Like even these kinds of basic questions about, what we consider success look really different from field to field, and it takes a lot of communication to get to this point of understanding. But that said, despite the fact that these kinds of conversations are really hard, I think that the only way that we can get more collaboration between fields is if people are willing to sit down and do this. And so, I have been trying to kind of live this in my own research. I don't even know what field I would put myself in anymore because I'm someone who started out so deeply in machine learning. I was publishing all in NeurIPS during my PhD a million years ago. But these days I do a lot of more work that's in the HCI space. But I hadn't previously worked with people, or I hadn't previously worked on problems in mechanistic interpretability until recently. And so I have started up a project recently that includes collaborators from both the HCI side and the mechanistic interpretability side. And honestly, this project has been really hard and it's been really slow because it's just taking a long time for us to get to the same place, to kind of reach this common ground, you know? But I think that in the end, it's worth it. And, you know, not everybody needs to do this, but some people need to be doing it. And putting in the time to form these relationships and work on these really interdisciplinary projects, I think is the way forward, and the way that we make sure that the technical solutions that we are building are actually going to be the ones that result in human agency and human flourishing, and are helpful to real people. Sorry, that was a very long-winded response, but interdisciplinary collaboration is something I'm very passionate about.
Okay, any other questions? If not, yeah, let's thank Jenn again, and I will have a short coffee break, and we'll reconvene at 4 p.m. for the last keynote talk.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Jenn.